I would be doing you a serious disservice as a TC to not educate you a little bit about writing an executory contract, especially in Texas.
Hey everybody, I had the pleasure recently of chatting with Angel Miller from C3TC, transaction coordinating company that is handling all of our paperwork for our purchases. And I had some questions for her regarding how we're protecting a lender on a wrap that we're doing in Texas. And she said, you know what? This is a great learning opportunity for yourself and the rest of your audience. And so she wanted to take a step back and start with all the intricacies of executory contracts, especially in Texas. So here we go.
So I thought maybe we can spend this 30 minutes talking about what an executory contract actually is.
Okay.
We can use this property specifically since it's in Texas, because Texas does have a lot of mandates on an executory contract that a lot of states don't. So
Okay.
it's something that you, as a seller entering into an executory contract, should understand before you ever write your own contract and dictate the terms of that contract.
Okay.
We will
Yeah.
definitely dive deep into that when we get into the transactional engineer piece of it. And
Okay.
for those who don't understand the difference, you have a transaction coordinator, who, I'm really going to put this very simply, is somebody who may or may not write your contracts. They open up escrow and they manage the escrow process until the deal gets to the finish line. But then you also have a transactional engineer who oftentimes can be a transaction coordinator as well. We do have a couple of great ones on our team, but that person is more geared to structuring the terms of a deal to make sure that the ROI is there.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is not always going to be your TC. And I want to be very clear about that, because many TCs are not transactional engineers. That
Okay.
is just like
Okay.
anything else, just like an underwriter connector, it is a craft.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's charged a separate fee for structuring that deal for you versus just the TC piece of it. So for
Gotcha.
people watching, I just want to be clear on that.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Angel's
absolutely.
gonna like dive deep here for us.
Yeah, that's what, like I said, I mean, my value to you or anyone else, any other client, is that I can bring value and education on whatever it is that you're deciding to do, whatever that deal structure looks like, whatever that exit strategy is. My goal is to be able to bring value and education to whatever that is.
I love it. I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Because what we often find is those people who have been doing it a long time and are knowledgeable, they're not using a TC. They've done enough of those things along the way that maybe they do those themselves.
Okay.
Okay. Oftentimes, really, what lands in our lap are people who aren't really sure how to move forward. They don't really understand the intricacies of doing these kind of deals. So that's the value I bring, was the knowledge. So today, like I said, I do want to just educate a little bit. And for those who will be viewing this, I want to talk about the executory contract specifically. Okay. What is an executory contract, right? One of the things that I always tell people, because you hear different nomenclatures, right? So it might be bond for title, it might be contract for deed in some states. It is state specific what terms are used, but they're all executory contracts. Okay. Um, but
Is
that's
it,
what, yeah.
if I could pause, is it even possible that within a state they call it different things?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, because I feel
Absolutely.
like we did a bond for title in South Carolina. I feel
Yeah,
like I've heard people call it other things. Okay.
absolutely. It is
Yeah.
state specific what verbiage is used, and is often dictated by the recording office of even a county.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and that's what your TC's for. They need to know how things should be properly recorded in a state or your title
Okay.
company or attorney. Okay. But basically, just in a nutshell, an executory contract is simply just a long-term agreement that mostly resembles like a rent to own arrangement. The buyer lives in the property but doesn't own it until the end of the contract, in which the seller would convey title at that time once payments are all complete. Okay, so just be clear on that. Title is not conveyed during an executory contract until the term of the agreement has ended. Okay, and all payments are complete. So let's talk a little bit about what makes a valid executory contract. And this
Okay.
is sometimes where people get tripped up, because this can be state specific. Okay. So if you, as the seller in the transaction, have decided to write an executory contract, your TC, your attorney, whomever you're bringing to head out this deal, somebody needs to understand what the property code in that state mandates. Okay. Because every state is different. There are things that can be mandated in the property code for an executory contract specifically that if you don't follow, is not going to be enforced regardless of what you have written in your contract.
Okay.
Okay. So everybody needs to be under the understanding of what that particular state's property code is. Okay.
Gotcha.
And today we're going to talk specifically about Texas because that's where you have a property in escrow right now, and it's your
Yeah.
intent to your exit strategy is to write an executory contract.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And we've never done one there, and we plan on doing at least a couple more. Yeah, over the course of a couple of years. So
yeah, so you're going to need this knowledge, right?
yeah.
Because you want your contract to be sound. You want it to be as bulletproof as you can make it. And the only way that you can really ensure that you're doing that is to understand the requirements as the seller in the transaction for Texas property code. Okay. So just some general ones. There are other mandates. Of course, Texas code is very long. It is one of the most stringent, if you ask me. But some of the basic ones that you're going to just need to know is length of contract. In Texas, there is a minimum of a 6-month contract for an executory contract.
Okay.
Okay. A contract could never be less than 6 minutes. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. The buyer must use the property as their main residence. Okay. So you can't wrap it to a guy who then wants to wrap it to somebody else. Okay.
Okay.
If you're using an executory contract, the buyer must use the property mainly as their residence. Okay. And the buyer and seller cannot be related, which is, it can cause a problem sometimes, right?
Hmm.
So it can't be like a parent and a child. You cannot use an executory contract in Texas to do that for your child, for a grandparent, a grandchild, or a sibling.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, another interesting piece of Texas code is there are no oral executory contracts.
Okay.
Everything on the executory contract must be in writing, okay, and it has to be signed by both parties. And there are many states that do allow oral agreements even within the contract. So, for instance, you guys have written a contract, you and your buyer are in agreement on everything, everything's good, and then couple days later, your buyer or you are like, oh, should have included use of the garage or for business or something. And you guys are like, oh, okay, that's fine. No, no worries. You can't do that. Anything that is added to the contract has to be amended in writing with both buyer and seller.
Okay. It seems
Okay.
like that would be standard everywhere, but
It's not.
yeah, interesting.
It is not.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many rentals you have done, but that's one of the reasons, like when you're buying a property that has a tenant in it, that an estoppel letter is done.
Hmm.
Because sometimes there are oral promises or agreements that are made outside of a lease agreement. And that's what the estoppel letter uncovers. It
Yeah.
allows the buyer and seller to state, oh, we did make this promise outside of the written contract. And then that gives them the opportunity at that time to both sign off on that promise or agreement that was made outside of the written contract.
Yeah, that's
So
something I just learned about and have been fortunate that it hasn't been an issue yet.
thank God, because a lot of people don't. They'll buy houses with tenants in them and never do an estoppel letter. That estoppel letter is protection for you
Hmm.
when you buy that. That previous landlord didn't make any oral promises
Right.
to a contract with your tenant that you're now going to be
Yeah.
held to,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
So always do the estoppel letter.
Yeah.
But back to this. So we want to talk about some of the risks that are associated with buying a home on an executory contract. And the biggest is probably that your buyer doesn't own the property until they satisfy the contract terms, right?
Right.
Which limits your buyer. When that contract is in effect, the buyer's unable to sell the home themselves or borrow against the home's value. Okay, so as the buyer in an executory contract, you can never take out an additional loan. Even if they wanted to remodel or do anything like that, they're unable to do that until they actually own title to the property. Okay.
Could they refinance though? And that would satisfy the.
Now, if they refinance
Okay.
and complete the contract, yes,
Okay. Okay.
which we'll get into a little bit because
Okay.
there are
Yeah.
there in Texas specifically, there are prepayment issues with that.
Oh,
Okay. So
interesting.
we'll talk
Okay.
about that as we go on.
Okay.
Uh, but another interesting thing in Texas that I did want to bring to your attention is in a lot of states, you can write your executory contract, say, for 10 years. Okay. They make their payments over that 10 years. The deed is still not conveyed until that contract is done. Okay. And if in the ninth year, they decide to stop making payments, you can take it back and they lose anything they've put in home, right? That's the general premise of the contract for deed. If they didn't honor the contract as is, you keep the property and you rinse and repeat and start that over with somebody else,
Right.
and they've lost anything they put into it.
Yeah.
However, in Texas, the seller actually starts to gain equity in an executory contract.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. Okay.
They have something in Texas called the 40 or 48 rule. Okay. And all that states is if they've paid 40% of the sale price into the contract, if they've paid 40% of that sale price, they now have equity protection. Okay. Or they've paid 48 months worth of installments. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the caveat to that is they've had to meet the 40%, they've had to meet the 48 payments, or the contract's been recorded with the county. Okay. So that any three of those meets the 40-48 rule that states if for some reason after that 40-48, your buyer defaults, the property has to be sold through foreclosure. And the
Oh,
and the buyer may actually get some of that money, okay, on the proceeds, because they do legitimately have equity protection after that 40-48. Okay. Yes. And we'll come back to the piece about it being recorded because that is a stipulation that you definitely need to understand. Okay. But on the 40-48, sellers are required to record any executory contract within 30 days of signing. Okay. And that does specifically trigger that home equity protection. Okay. So here's a gray area. And I'm good. Before I state this, I'm going to remind everyone I'm not an attorney, but this is definitely where you would want to consult an attorney. But this is a gray area in the code. Okay. Because it is a mandate that you, the seller, are required to record your contract. If a buyer defaults anytime in there, the contract is canceled, you're also required to record that. However, even though it's mandated that you're required to record that contract, many people don't.
okay.
And the only recourse for that is you paying a fine. Okay. So a lot of people choose not to do it to incite that 40-48 equity thing. They'd rather just pay the small fine, which it is. It's like $500, but it's much smaller than paying out, right?
Yeah.
So this is an area where I would say you definitely want to consult an attorney and talk through that. However, I just want to make you aware, those are the three stipulations of the 40-48, and it does depend on whether or not you recorded that property, which is a
Yeah. So
decision you and your attorney would want to make together.
if I had consulted an attorney, we decide not to record
Mhm.
the executory contract, I would essentially be hoping that if this person was going to default, they would default before at 39% or at 47 months.
This is good. And I was really hoping that you would catch that
Okay.
because here's the thing, and this is why we're talking about this before you go writing an executory contract, right? You could decide as the seller, in order to prevent that equity protection, I'm only going to write contracts that are going to they're going to be required to refinance or pay off the term of the contract in 42 months.
Okay.
Hit that threshold. Okay. Or there's also the 40% rule. So not just payments, they've either made 48 payments or they've earned 40% of the purchase price.
Hmm.
You need to calculate if your purchase price is $1,000 a month, what they're paying, then you want to make sure that that thing is going to balloon before they reach that 40% based on the payments, because it's either or
Yeah.
40-48. Okay. So
Interesting.
it's definitely something that you want to understand before you write the terms of your contract,
Okay.
right?
That's where
Okay.
the engineer comes in.
That's where the engineer comes in. And also, like I said, whether you're a transaction coordinator or a transaction engineer, when you're doing these things, you should always be consulting an attorney. And that could be TC, because we do that on behalf of you guys. If
Hmm.
we have an executory contract, somebody with whether it's an attorney or a paralegal, somebody's reviewing that contract. Okay. All the contracts that we use are generally populated from an attorney. Okay.
Yeah.
That's, you've got to have somebody who understands the state property code and wherever you're purchasing that property. And this is the reason why, because they all have their little caveats, right?
Yeah.
So your buyer, let's talk about your buyer for a minute, because they have rights under an executory contract, right? So you need to understand when you're writing your contract that the stipulations are in there for your buyer as well, because your buyer does need to be protected, just
Yeah.
as you need to be protected. That's the ethical thing to do, right? So in a nutshell, just some of the basic things that you want to ensure that you're not violating are your buyer understands the condition of the property. They know the financing terms of the contract. And this is just a suggestion here, but anytime you're writing an executory contract, you should probably just include a term sheet. And if you do that, you hit the tick box for all states. Okay. If one state doesn't require it, it's okay. It's the ethical thing to do anyway. So your buyer understands your financing terms, right?
Yeah.
But if the state does require it, that's not an additional thing that you have to remember to do if you just add it in as part of
Right.
your.
Okay.
They also have to receive notice of any violations that happen throughout the contract. So if your buyer violates the contract in any way, they've got to receive some kind of notice of that. Okay. Texas, particularly, this is definitely not all states, and we're going to get into this a little deeper in just a minute, but you are required to give your buyer updates on their loan each year. Every year they have to get an update on their loan, and we'll get
Okay.
into what some of those things are in just a minute. And that they receive a warranty deed to the property within 30 days of making the last payment. That is a requirement, and it's a hefty one. Okay, so say your buyer does pay off the term of the contract. If you don't convey that deed within 30 days, you're going to be charged $500 a day for those 30 days, up to that 30 days. And if you hit the 90-day mark, no, take that back. It's $250 for 30 days. And then if you hit the 90-day mark, it's $500 a day
Oh,
per day.
Yeah.
That deed is not conveyed. So just be aware of that. Okay.
okay. $7,500 for the first.
Yeah.
It goes just like you hit day
Yeah.
30 and whoops. Yikes. Okay. Yeah.
So make sure that you are prepared as time comes and that contract's going to be coming to an end, that you're prepared to get that deed taken care of. And
Okay.
it does in Texas, just another tidbit, it does have to be a general warranty deed, not like a quick claim deed or anything like that.
Okay.
You must convey the general warranty deed unless you and the seller both agreed specifically within the contract that it would be anything else. Okay, that has to be specific in the contract.
Okay. We're far from this. I'm just out of curiosity, and maybe if anybody's listening, if anybody else is going to be listening that has this question, when the general warranty deed happens, is that a title search? Is all that happening again? Like,
Anytime a deed is conveyed, usually there's a
yeah.
title. And
Okay.
it is something that you should do through the escrow process.
Yeah, just to make sure nothing's okay. Yeah.
I mean, I would, if I was your buyer, I would definitely request it,
Okay.
because what could have happened along the way? Let's talk about that. What could have happened? You could have had a lien put on the property along the way because maybe you owed something. It's still in your name, right? And maybe now you've got a judgment there that wasn't
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
the buyer contracted with you. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I was your buyer, that would definitely be, I want this run through the title company so we can pull title.
Yeah,
We can
interesting. I
review
was
the.
thinking it from the seller's perspective,
Yeah.
like I don't care if there's any liens on it. It's his thing now. But yeah, okay. That makes sense.
And here's the thing, Nathaniel, you've got to do business ethically.
Yeah.
And we know there are tons of buyers out there, probably the majority of buyers out there, who are not going to think to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So ethically, you as the seller want to do business ethically. That's just the right thing to do. Run
Yeah.
that title, make sure nothing's come up over that 3, 4, 5 year period, whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't even think from the seller's side like I could have had liens.
Absolutely.
I was just
And
thinking
look,
like the buyer could have gotten liens on it. I guess could the buyer get liens on it though if they weren't the title holder? No, huh?
correct.
Oh,
Correct.
okay. Yeah,
But we will
interesting.
talk about this. Actually, that's one of the things I'm getting ready to kind of get
Okay.
into.
Yeah. I jump ahead
You
a little
know,
bit. That's why.
Oh, no, that's good because that means your mind's going because these are things that you probably never thought about before.
Yeah. No.
And again, we're talking about specific to Texas at this moment, but every state may have different mandates in their code that you need to be aware of. So again, that's where you pull in your TCE attorney, whomever, somebody that has some understanding of these things, because you could pay very hefty penalties for not making sure that you're doing what you need to do.
Yeah, or pay penalties in the frustration department with a buyer that's not this part of the reason this conversation is happening, people, is that I have been going back and forth with Angel about a property that we own and had sold on a bond for title in South Carolina, and she's looking at this thing like, oh, you made some mistakes on this thing. And we're learning the mistakes currently, like not having specific late payments and verbiage and things like that in there that are it seems like fortunately we're going to be okay after having consulted an attorney, but
But
we
you
could do
never
better in the
know.
future.
That could have went south, right?
Right.
And again, it's just simply avoided by understanding what the property code is in the
Yeah.
market that you're trying to do these things.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of education can save a lot of money along the way.
Yeah. We didn't have an angel in our network when we did this.
We got this now, though,
Yeah,
Nathaniel. We
yeah.
got it now. All right. So some of the things, and this is back to me talking, I said I wanted to get a little bit more into the requirement to give that buyer an accounting statement every year. But these are just some of the general requirements you as the seller are going to have to provide to your buyer as mandated by Texas Property Code. And one of the things that a lot of people don't think about, and is generally not a requirement in every state, but in Texas it is. So I'm going to make you aware. You are required to give your buyer a recent property survey, and it can't be older than a year. Okay.
Okay.
And there is a reason for that, and I'm going to get to it in just a second, but you are required to give that survey. Okay.
Okay.
You also must provide a tax certificate from each entity that collects taxes on the house. You have to provide them a copy of any insurance policy on the property, and that's the entire policy. So everything can be seen, what
Okay.
coverage, whose name's on it, all those good things. Indicate all interest or late charges that are under the contract, which you learned from your other property. You've
Hmm.
got you've got to be very clear on those.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to disclose any issues with the property, even if the roof's bad, buyer understands that, they're okay with it, they're willing to fix it. You still need to disclose any issues with the property in the contract.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to provide notice in writing if the property is under a homeowners association. Okay. You have to disclose whether the property is in a recorded subdivision or not. Okay. And that ties back to your survey.
Hmm.
And again, I'm going to tell you why, as we get a little bit further, why that can be an issue. And again, you're mandated to record the contract within 30 days of signing. Okay. And then one of the biggest things that I'm circling back to was that written statement every year for the accounting. Okay. And the only reason that I'm touching on this a little bit more is because there are several requirements within that one requirement that I want you to be aware of. Okay. Because you have to give them a statement every year that says the total amount they've paid, how much they still owe, the number of remaining payments, how much is paid in taxes every year, and how much is paid in insurance. On the insurance, additionally, if there were any claims that year and you were provided proceeds, where did they go? Who
Okay.
received them and what were they used for?
Hmm.
Along with a copy of the current insurance policy. Okay. Now, if you don't do that, you are going to pay a penalty for each annual statement that you failed to give to your buyer. And that includes, if they had to get an attorney, it's going to include their attorney fees as well. So again, big expense if you're not providing that written annual accounting statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this covered, this annual statement? Is this something that's covered in the monthly statements that they're getting from a servicing company?
Third party servicing? Absolutely not.
Okay, so this is something that we would request from the servicing company yearly, or
Mhm.
we have to put together ourselves?
What you're getting from your servicing company will be how much was paid,
Hmm.
may or may not, depending on the servicing company, show how much is still owed. It will show the remaining number of payments generally. But oftentimes, unless the insurance and taxes are escrowed, servicing's not going to have that.
Okay. Yeah.
Because sometimes when you're writing your executory contract, you're going to say, my buyer is going to now be responsible for carrying the insurance, right? So all I can say on that is it depends.
Yeah. Okay.
On who the servicer is and what information they do provide you every year.
Interesting.
So you as the seller need to understand all your requirements.
Yeah.
Because your servicer may not be able to provide all that, and you're still required to provide that information.
Right. Okay. Yep.
All right. So again, I just wanted to touch on that because that is a big piece that you are going to be responsible for every year. Okay. And that kind of ties back to when you're thinking about the length of the contract as well, right? Because if you're trying to miss that 40-48 rule again, anytime in Texas, personally, I would consider always doing a contract to balloon before they can reach that 40 or 48. And it's going to limit the number of years that I'm going to be required to do some of these things, right?
Okay.
So a little bit of housekeeping and just making sure that you've got the bandwidth to ensure that you're providing everything that you need to provide to them based on mandate.
Yeah. Interesting. That 40-48 seems like a little cog. What's the
Indeed,
thing?
absolutely. Little cog in the wheel. Yep. Okay, so your buyer, of course, has the right to truly understand the financing terms of the contract. Okay, so again, I go back to that term sheet. It could be simple because it's not a huge requirement, but simple things. They have to understand the property price. They have to clearly understand the interest rates that you're charging under the contract. They also have to clearly understand the total amount, including the interest that they're going to pay under that contract. And you've already touched on this one before, but whether late charges apply and how much those charges are. And you want to break those down as simply as you can. Okay, whether it's going to be a one-time fee, a daily fee, all those things should be in that term sheet.
Yeah.
Okay, which I personally would include with every contract that I write. Okay. And then some kind of statement on whether or not you're good. Sometimes it catches you off guard.
I don't know. I'm glad I got and Brittany's back here giggling about it. Oh man, I just went down the wrong pipe there. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I just want to make sure you were going to fall over.
Yeah, no, I'm good. That is staying in the video too, by the way.
All right, and it's simply just a statement of whether or not they are going to be charged a prepayment penalty.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it's not too extensive, but again, you want to be very clear on the terms. Okay. And that's easily eradicated by just putting in the term sheet into the contract.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is another little small code that you may just want to put in your hat. And that is your buyer can always demand. I don't like that word, but it's truly written in the mandate that way. They can always demand to know how much is due under your contract. Okay. And the funny piece of that, Nathaniel, is if your buyer calls you today and says, I need to know how much I owe today to pay this contract off, you only have 10 days to respond. Okay. And that can be really hairy for somebody. Maybe somebody's not using servicing. Maybe somebody doesn't keep good records. Okay. Maybe they don't even know how to calculate what that person owes today to pay off the. Okay. But they have the right to do that in the state of Texas. And if you don't respond in 10 days, they can make a payment to you for the amount they believe is due under the note. For the contract. Okay. And if they do that, you have to accept that payment. If they do it, you only have 20 days to rebuttal or it's done. They've paid you, deed needs to be conveyed. Okay. So always, and that's an important, and I'm going to tie that back to that accounting piece again, giving them that yearly accounting, because at that point, if you remember, one of the things that I said that you have to provide them is how many payments are left and how much is left on the note, right? So if this ever happens, you should be prepared if you're actually doing that accounting statement each year.
Yeah.
But interesting one of those little tiny things that's in the mandate, I thought you should be aware of. Okay. And then, of course, some of the other things are just the buyer has the right to be notified in writing of any violations. Okay. And I'm going to tell you this just because I find it funny in Texas code, but it has to be in writing, of course, as most states, delivered by registered or certified mail. But in Texas specifically, I don't know what caused this to be put in the mandate. It's weird, but everything you do has to be printed in 14-point font.
Okay. What
It
the
can't
heck?
be New Times Roman 12.
Huh.
Can't be Arial 10.
Yeah. Wingdings, no wingdings. Yeah.
Yeah. No wingdings, no
Yeah.
emojis. It has to be printed in plain 14-point font, whatever it is.
Interesting.
So weird.
Yeah.
But it's not enforceable if it's not printed that way because it's in the mandate.
Huh.
And then, of course, it has to contain specific statutory language, which you'll find within the code per the violation, whatever it is that you're notified.
Okay.
And then, of course, another one that I wanted to touch on specifically, just because you've ran into this before, is what happens when a buyer misses payments. Okay. Because in Texas, you have to give the buyer a chance to catch up on their payments. Okay.
Okay.
And a lot of times people are thinking, because sometimes they'll write executory contracts and then they'll put in a deed in lieu or performance deed, a lot of people call it. But mandate's going to be the overarching thing that they're going to look at if this instance comes up. Okay. So in Texas, a buyer has 60 days to catch up on payments if they are in the 40-48. And this is why that 40-48 comes back and is so important again. Okay. So if they've reached that 40% threshold or they've made those 48 payments and the contract has been recorded, again,
Yeah.
the buyer has 60 days to catch up on those payments. In all other cases, so if they haven't reached the 40, the 48 payments haven't been met, and you've decided not to record the deed, then they only have 30 days to catch up payments. Okay. And here's a big difference in Texas versus a lot of other states. If by chance that buyer's reached that 40-48, they've had 60 days to catch up the payment, and they have not, your recourse is to start the foreclosure process, and the home has to be sold. Okay. It's not in the instance where in some other states, you've written this contract, they're sitting in year 9, they've definitely hit the 40%, they've made all above 48 payments. You just take the contract back and evict them and start over, rinse and repeat, right? That's not the way it happens in Texas. If they've reached that 40 or 48, they've missed those 60 days and you've started that foreclosure process, the home has to be sold. And your buyer is probably going to be eligible for some of that because now they have equity.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
In the event they haven't reached the 40-48 and it's not recorded, then they have 30 days. And this falls more in line with a lot of other states. 30 days evict them and you can rinse and repeat. Okay. Because they don't have equitable interest in the property at that point.
Okay.
Okay. So that's a definite piece that you want to think about as we write the structure of the contract. How we want to do that? Do we want to make sure they're not hitting the 40-48? Are we going to record? Right? Are we going to record it? Or are we going to go ahead and put in a stipulation that in that 30 days it automatically is eviction process and we move forward? They lose whatever it is they've put in, it's lost.
Yeah.
Which is probably, for your favorable terms for you, is where you want to be, right?
Well, we always hope that never comes to fruition. Seems like we stare down the barrel every month with our one in South Carolina, though.
Exactly. And you're going to run into these things. That's why it's important to understand the state mandates on them. Yeah. So just a couple of other things to touch on. One of them was back to, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Can you hear my dog snoring? He's laying at my feet snoring.
No, that's awesome, though.
I have this big beast and he sounds like a man snoring.
Yeah.
So funny. So whenever you're writing an executory contract in Texas specifically, your buyer does have the right to cancel the contract for 14 days. So I want you to be aware of that. Even if they sign today, they legally have the right to cancel that contract within 14 days. Okay. And you're required, of course, if you've taken any payments from them, that all has to be returned. And if they've made any improvements to the property, they have to be reimbursed. So that's maybe something just as a protection as you write your contract, that we understand that you have 14 days to cancel. However, if you make any improvements to the property within that 14 days, that is your responsibility.
Okay.
So just another little one of those little things that can get you. Because what if they knew they were buying the house, you guys were doing it, they already set up a roofing guy to come fix that roof we were talking about that was bad,
Yep.
and the roof guy comes day 2, they moved in, day 9 the roof's done, right? They paid the roof guy $5,000, and now they want that back because they're canceling on day 12. Okay. So just another little one of those little caveats that
Yeah.
that are in that good old Texas property code that you want to be aware of. So something else you may want to put into your executory contract. Okay. And also keep in mind that even though they have, oh, I'm sorry, my mind just went left.
Yeah.
But I did really touch on, because we were talking about the reason that you're providing them that survey.
Oh yeah.
If for some reason, and this comes into in Texas especially, like apparently they have an issue with subdivision in Texas. Okay. So if properties weren't subdivided correctly, the buyer basically can rescind the contract because of that. Okay. So
Okay.
that's why you're always providing that survey up front to show all the meets and bounds, everything is correct before, because they could go all the way to the end of the contract, things like that, and then go, oh, wait a minute, we
Uh,
ordered a survey and
uh,
it's not subdivided
yeah.
properly. We thought we were getting 2 acres and we're only getting 1, all those things. So it's easier just to provide that survey up front as mandated by code and have that piece settled.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think there was one other thing that I wanted to go over.
You were starting to go there and then
Yeah.
that's all right. It'll
Oh,
come to you as soon as we hang up. Oh no.
yeah, I just wanted to circle back on the liens too, because you had asked about that.
Mm,
You also, as the seller, cannot cause any liens to be put on the property. Okay. So if for some reason a judgment does come up along the way, they have the right to back out of that contract based on that.
okay.
So when, like, we're at the end of our contract now, we're going to convey this warranty deed, we run it through title, and boom, Nathaniel's got a judgment on there. Now, you can either take the 90 days and try to settle that, get it paid, get it off there, be able to convey to your buyer clean title, or they can say, we're out, and they can, especially if they've hit the 40/48, get some of that back from you.
Well,
Now, the only time, of course, the buyer can't put a lien on the property. You can't, the buyer can't. The only caveat to that is the only allowed liens that can be enforced are utility liens, right? Now, there can be, say, your buyer somewhere along the way wants to put on solar panels, or they want to put in a water system, right? Those are liens that can be recorded if you and the buyer both agree. And then there's an
okay.
amendment to the contract. Hey,
Okay.
we've agreed that solar panels are going to be whatever, because solar panels, water softeners, all those things, those people put liens on your property for it
Yeah.
until, right?
Yeah.
And those are allowable. They don't necessarily fall in with utilities because utilities are mandated by the government, but those are exceptions too if you and the seller or you and the buyer can agree on that.
Okay.
Just make sure there's an addendum in place to the contract that states you and the buyer both agree that this lien is acceptable. Agree. I think that's it. I think that's everything else. As I went back to refresh on property code, was pretty standard in every state. But these are the things that I wanted to make you aware of specifically because that's where your property is going to be.
Yeah.
So,
I can think of a couple other questions that um we've already talked about, but maybe other people would have regarding the executory contract. So from an insurance standpoint, the buyer is not on title. So are they getting homeowners insurance? Are they getting renters insurance? What does that look like?
It could be either way. That's really between you and the buyer. Some people in a rep situation will have the buyer now responsible for the insurance. Either way it goes, if you keep insurance, you want to put that person on as an additional insured. If they get insurance, they want to put you on as an additional insured. So
Okay.
it can go either way. Just make sure you're both protected.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then as far as because title is not being conveyed until the payments are fully made, do I, as the seller, still get to claim depreciation on the property until that's?
You do
Yeah,
because they don't own the property. Title's
right.
not going to be, that warranty deed is not going to be conveyed until they've paid the contract in full.
Okay. And then but the property taxes, those are still going to come to me because I'm the title holder. Yeah.
Correct. But
Yeah. Okay.
again, just remember that's part of your yearly disclosure. They do have to know how much is being paid toward property taxes and insurance.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Well, we went a little over what we
Yeah,
had
we did,
allocated here,
but
but
these are all things you needed to know before we
yeah,
start your
I
contract.
appreciate it. So we actually put this meeting together to talk about something not completely different, but different a little bit. And Angel wanted to make sure that we laid the foundation for success moving forward here. So there will be a part two to this to talk
Yeah,
about how bringing in a private money lender or private money partner on a wrap and how they're protected and how to structure those things. So I look forward to that. I don't want to take up any more of your time on a Saturday though, so we'll cut it here. Have a good rest of your Saturday.
you too.
Later.
Bye.